Call my sister and my brother and say, what were your favorite memories? My sister is just a couple years younger than me, and she said, you have to tell the story about racing in the old sanctuary. Racing? I don't remember that. She said, yeah, you do. Remember when Mom had all those meetings and she drug us along for every single meeting? We go sit in the back of the church in the old sanctuary and lay down and roll under the pews, and whoever got to run the church won. And then after that, we go outside and run around the brick wall around the church, which wasn't that large as it is now. And then when we got to the gaps, we'd see who could jump over. Probably not the safest activity, but I don't think I ever won either. Let's see. I remember my first youth trip was to the pavilion, and it was actually, I think, when I was about 5 or 6. And my dad was the youth person, and we all crowded in all the cars, and my sister and I were in the back of our station wagon, and we just thought it was the coolest thing because we got to hang out with the cool kids at the pavilion. And of course, I have to add my fishing story. When I was young, Bob Morris was our preacher. And I remember Sundays after church, we would go to the Western Sizzlin for lunch. But then occasionally on some Saturdays, my parents would get a call saying, bring the girls and let's go fishing. I don't know if we ever caught anything, but it was fun. I think that's really all the stories I can think of.
Those are great stories. Nicole, I have my mother, who is Mrs. Annie Laurie Atkinson, and several of you referred to her. My father was a minister here in 1931 to 1935. She is 100 years old. We just celebrated her birthday, and she has a very short and brief story that I think is so important because of the Christmas poem that you read and the fact that she met Mr. and Mrs. Huntington. She says she's going to try, okay?
The first thing I wanted to tell you, though, was that I wanted to tell Bobby Clyburn that I lived in that old house that he wanted moved away. I came here as a bride in 1934, and those were some of the happiest days of my life. We did not have electricity, no running water, no telephone, no paved road, but we had a wonderful time with oyster roast and fish fries and all the things that were very happy. But my first official duty as a bride was for the Christmas tree. Mr. Huntington asked his caretaker, Mr. Tarbox, who was a member of our church, if we were going to do anything for the children at Christmas. And he said, I don't know, but I will find out. And so he came to the church, and they said they always had a program. And Mr. Huntington said, well, I would like to share in that program. So he said, would you get someone to come down and talk with me about this party so I could share in it? And so I was one appointed to go and talk with him. And one of the Oliver girls went with me. And Mr. Huntington was living in the Spanish castle. And so we were as excited as the children were at the Christmas tree to get to go into that that castle. And at Christmas time, Mr. Huntington did share very generously with the Christmas party, and hearing the poem that, about the Christmas story, it was almost exactly what our party was. It was a community Christmas tree. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Jim has a story to tell about you.
You know, they say the church is not just a building, but it's the people. And I'm talking about connectivism. This lady right here She and her husband were my pastors when I was growing up in Bishopville, in Bethlehem United Methodist. And so I've had a connection to this church all my life and didn't know it until I moved here. He served here in the early 30s, and his last church was my home church, and they retired, built a home in Bishopville and retired there. So she's been like a second mother to me, and she used to sit beside my mother at church and so forth. But a friend of mine, I went to high school, graduated high school with and college, is now a United Methodist preacher. He's at First Church in Bennettsville, Reverend Fred McDaniel. And he came to Blessing of the Inlet this past year, and I don't know how he got it, but he brought to me Dr. Atkinson's funeral book from when he was at Belin. A little booklet that had prayers and scriptures and so forth in it. And tucked inside there was a typewritten piece of paper, which was my father's funeral that Dr. Atkinson had officiated at. So the Atkinsons and Belin have been a lot to me and my family over the years, and we do appreciate it.
It's amazing how everyone is connected, and you really don't know it until everyone starts telling their stories. Hold on one second, I'm going to Kelly Dorman now. She's a member of the Lee family, well known for wonderful seafood. She and her family enjoyed Belin and had 3 young girls, and they were definitely the minority then, because I don't think the youth program was what it is today with Austin Bond leading. So here you go.
Well, I wish my grandmother, Pearlie, was still here so I could ask her some funny stories, because she always had a great story to tell. I'm not a good storyteller like she was, but I'm sure she would have some wonderful stories to tell about Rainer and Gladys Hughes that worked with us, and Joanne and Charlie Welch, and I think a lot of good stories. I wish we had written some of that stuff down. You always say that. But the thing that I'm most grateful for about Belin, other than the beautiful setting and view that we have, I think we take it for granted a lot of times, but I mean, can you think of another church that has such a beautiful setting? We're so blessed to be able to have that building where it is, and I hope it always stays there, because it's a blessing. But like Nicole said, when my husband and I moved to, I grew up in Merle's Inlet with the restaurant being in my family, but we moved down here when we took over the restaurant in the 80s. There wasn't much of a youth program. There wasn't hardly any children. I remember thinking when we came to church, gosh, where's the kids? But anyway, the youth program now is such a blessing. And I feel like Austin, I don't know how he does what he does. I know he has a lot of help, a lot of volunteers, but he is phenomenal, and a lot of young lives are being touched. And I'm so grateful for that, and I'm so grateful for the ministers here who make it very plain and very clear that they feel like church is a place for children. And they don't mind kids disrupting the service or crying or whatever, because that's what Jesus said we should do, and that's what it's all about, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Go now to Buzz and Roxanne Freeman. They were married in the original church, brought their baby Margaret here, and Buzz has helped with finances, and I know that Roxanne has spent many hours with the youth, so want to share some memories?
Okay, thank you. I'll probably speak for both of us tonight. But someone, I think it was Kelly, mentioned about the youth, the way it's changed. When we first joined the church, our preacher was Bob Morris. We had kind of no youth. Bob Morris was actually an acolyte. In the morning, we would go up and light the candles. We didn't have any youth. We'd come so far. But just quickly to add to these stories, we were married in this church. We visited in 84, married in 85. From that first visit, we felt a certain spirit of this church, and we knew this was our home. And of course, it still is. That spirit with maybe 200 to 300 members, I don't know what membership was in 84, 85. Whether it is 2,000, whatever the membership is today, is very similar to what it was then. To me, that's why it's so special. And it's because of the membership. We've had in my time, three wonderful ministers, Bob Morris, Harold Lewis, and Mike Alexander. in over 30 years. But the most special part is when those ministers left, this membership embraced the new minister that was right behind them. And we're so fortunate to have with the quality of ministers we had and have, but have the membership that embraces our leadership of this church. And Mike, I know you recognize that that's just a wonderful thing. So it's just a great place to be. I've got the old memories of the old barbecue hut. And Guy Cates, I believe, was a member with Reverend Belin. He's been here so long. He has been retired longer than I've been living. Nicole, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, Lady Richard wanted to say something, so we'll let her talk, and then we're going to have one final thought from Reverend Williamson.
I would like to say I grew up in the church, and I especially remember Mr. Needham Williamson when I was here. And it's hard for me to believe that he's only here 4 years because I thought he was here forever. I also went to church with the Hugheses and the Coffmans. But my mother used to kind of drop me off, and I would stay for church. And every day after church, I went to Oliver's Lodge, and I ate French fries and hush puppies with Miss Teeny. And I don't know if you remember Miss Teeny, but she stayed in her bedroom with her pink poodles all over her bed. So I'm not so sure if I came to church for the sermon or if it was the French fries and hush puppies, but it did get me here. I would like to tell about 2 things that were especially memorable for me, but it was when we started the dances, and we had the band come. And I must confess, that's when I kissed my first boy. So I'm not sure I had the real church spirit going to those dances, but I really, really enjoyed them. And the other thing I could remember, we had a panel one night, and the topic was the generation gap. And I'm sure this was with you, Mr. Williamson. And I was sitting with Holly and her sisters, and we used to get in so much trouble. And it was Reverend Wilcox was going to say something, and the question was, what did you and your parents argue about when you were a youth? And Van Turnerville leaned over and said, using the horse and buggy on Saturday night. I will never forget. We were just laughing, and they immediately stopped the sermon and asked us to stop talking what we thought was so funny. But I do remember really getting in trouble. But I left in '72 and didn't return until 2005, and now we're back. So this church has special memories for me also. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, now to the Reverend Needham Williamson, who served Belin from 1964 to 67, along with his wife, Bettine, and their son, Roger. And of course, I know many of you are waiting to hear what he has to say.
Thank you, Nicole. Wow. How would you like to have to follow all of that? And Henrietta says we're out of here at 5 o'clock.
We don't have
Which
to
means I've got
finish
5
at
minutes.
5. It's okay. We don't have to finish at 5.
What a wonderful occasion to be with so many dear friends from across the years, many new friends. Be with Annie Laurie Atkinson, who, believe it or not, was my Sunday school teacher in King Street when I was about 7 years old, and she still survived. And Margaret Ann, the daughter, does not know it, but as a junior high student, I had a crush on her. Now you know. One final story. Thought about it coming down. I could tell you about the Sunday that a cat came to church. Walked right down the aisle. I didn't see the cat. It sat on the kneeler of the communion wheel. And Marianne Kaufman she was then, and Bettine, my wife at that time, broke out laughing. I had no idea what they were laughing about. I thought it was a sermon. I stopped and they pointed like this. I looked down and there was this cat licking herself, taking her bath, totally oblivious to everything going on. Mayor, and you'll remember that Ruth Conover took that cat, added to her brood of 21 cats. Yeah, had a house for her. Well, I'm not going to tell you about that. Or I could tell you about the Sunday when we're having communion, and this mother brought her little boy, 4 or 5 years old, with her to the communion ring. They knelt, and hear me now, he stuck his head between the post holding up the communion rainbow, and his head was stuck there. He was yelling at the top of his voice, and some dear lady came forward with a container of hand lotion and gave it to me and said, "Slap it on his ears." We did, and we jerked him out, and he popped like popping a cork in the bottle. We could go on and on with this wonderful, funny stories. But I thought I needed to leave you with a little bit of a history lesson. As you already know, it was my privilege to follow Bobby Clyburn. And as he's already told you, we had virtually no facilities. And early on, we started talking about a dream that our church really needed an educational building, a fellowship hall, and some office space. It really was a dream. We had less than, I think, 250 members at that time. And we were looking at a $70,000 project. Now, to put that in perspective, my salary at that time, in 1966, was $5,000, one half of which was paid by the conference. The church couldn't even pay the full salary, Bobby, as you remember. But the dream caught on. And people like Clark Wilcox and Herbert Conover and Watson Mosier, and some of these longtime dear members of this church said, "We believe we can do it." Well, we went to the bank, borrowed what money we could, raised what we could, and we broke ground on one condition. The Conference Board of Missions and the Belin Board of Trust said, "We will give you 5.5 acres of land, free, if you will agree to build that educational building on the west side of Highway 17. They knew we would not have the room to put up a magnificent facility like this if it was crammed in down there on the waterfront. So we gladly accepted the proposal. The first unit of the educational building was built. And we were able to begin the first Mother's Morning Out and the first daycare center, I believe, in the community of girls in it, because of that new building. What you may not know is that as we were breaking ground for that building, which has meant so much across the years, and it's been added on to at least twice, the district superintendent, Carl Parker, sent me to Surfside to organize a new Methodist church. Francis K. remembers. I'll tell you, a lot of folks at Belin weren't happy about that a bit. Because we had a lot of members that lived at Surfside. But reluctantly, the church agreed to allow some 30 members, generous members, to transfer their membership to Surfside and help that church get started. And 2 weeks to the day after we broke ground for a new facility at Surfside, as Lord Hatton knows, they were underway with building their first unit for a church. So in reality, Belin is the mother church of Surfside United Methodist. I think that deserves a round of applause. You know, God has strange arithmetic. Bill Clinton says it's all arithmetic. But God's arithmetic says you divide and multiply. And that's exactly what happened. While the Belin congregation felt that they were being divided and sending 30 months to serve, look what's happened to Belin. You've had your cake and eat it too. As you've already said, you've got a marvelous waterfront church with a view that's unparalleled. But you've also got all this wonderful space where you've built this marvelous facility. And it's certainly my conviction that the very best days for Belin are in the future. Bobby Clyburn told me before we came to Belin, which was an annual conference, he said, something I need to tell you. You're not going to believe me, but it happens. He says, when you move into that new parsonage, you're in the middle of the night, your doorbell is going to ring. And you'll get up and answer the door and nobody will be there. But we've got a theory. It's the spirit, the ghost of the Reverend James L. Belin. He's come back to check things out. I thought Bobby was joking. It happened again and again and again. Because you see, that new parsonage was built over the site in Illinois where the mission house originally sat. And he'd been coming back to the place where he lived in time today. Could be. This much I know. While you have erected a new tombstone honoring the life and ministry of the Reverend James L. Belin, I'm convinced and convicted that his wonderful spirit of mission and ministry lives on today in a marvelous, magnificent way in this community of faith called Belin Memorial. God bless you.
Well, this has been such an honor and such a privilege to be with you today, and we're going to sing a little bit. Jim's going to lead us along with a few verses and here and there, some music that I'm sure you'll all enjoy.
I think most of you have a song book, a program. We invite you to join along. I'm going to ask any choir members who might be here. I know we have to practice, and I love practice. But if you would come up front and help us out, that would be great. We're going to sing one verse of each hymn that's printed in your booklet, please.
Praise
Christ, go forth in peace, go forth in the power of the Holy Spirit, to live out the dream that the Reverend James L. Belin dreamed so long ago, as we continue to live out our lives in loving